Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. For this week's episode, I interviewed a guy who co founded a blog network that was sold to AOL for $25 million, built the platform that TMZ is published on, and designed one of the first high profile newspaper apps for the iPad. You can't write a history of Web 2.0 without including the contributions of Brian Alvey. After getting his start doing design work for traditional publications like TV Guide and Business Week, Alvey teamed up with his childhood friend, Jason Calacanis, to launch a series of online publications. Eventually, the two created Weblogs Inc., a blog network that went on to be sold to AOL. The content management system Alvey built would eventually power AOL's portal and much of its websites. But Alvey didn't stop there. He'd go on to build publishing platforms that would power everything from TMZ to Rupert Murdoch's ambitious iPad app, The Daily. I interviewed Alvey about what it was like to run a blog network in Web 2.0's early days, how he ended up in a 45-minute meeting with Jeff Bezos, and why the iPad failed to save the media industry. Let's jump right into it. Hey, Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
So I brought you on because you have a long and interesting resume in digital media. It's so long, I don't know where exactly to start. So I was thinking we could maybe begin with Weblogs Inc., which you sold to AOL for, I think, if I remember correctly, the figure was somewhere around $25 million. Tell me, I don't think that is the exact starting point. What kind of led up to you forming that network?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the quick answer is, I've had publishing in my blood. Stan Lee just passed away recently, and I actually got a tour of Marvel Comics when I was a kid. So I always wanted to make comic books, hold something in my hand that I'd published. So publishing was in my DNA. It was in my blood. And so I worked as a magazine art director. I worked doing magazine desktop support back in the, 80s and 90s, and always loved that. So a friend of mine and I, Jason Calacanis, we decided to build a publishing company. We wanted to be like about.com. We wanted to have a big network of sites on a bunch of different topics. So that was the deal.
So people might recognize that name, Jason Calacanis. He's well known now as a angel investor, and also was very involved with things like Weblogs Inc. How did you know him?
We were high school friends. I was best friends with his older brother. So he and I would see each other on the subway coming home from Manhattan after we both went to college. And we kept saying, gosh, we need to work together. I was working with Business Week. He was working with Sony. And we just talked about media and publishing. It was his thing. It was my thing too. So it just seemed like that was the thing we were going to do. And then we created a magazine together, actually, that nobody knows about. Then he created another magazine, Silicon Valley Reporter. I was an art director and a CTO of that for a while. And we just worked together on and off. But it was always going to be a publishing company.
So you were working on the print side with design before you got onto the...
Yeah, I did 4-color design, exactly. And a lot of, making Quark files print and junk like that. So we always worked with magazines. And the funny thing, one of the companies I worked with is called Miller Freeman. So they had like 40 trade titles. And I didn't actually draw the dots between that and the blogging company. But when I worked there, they had like kitchen and bath business. That was one of their magazines, all about kitchen and baths and the stuff and then they had Guitar Player, right? The same magazine that's still around today. So they had like 50 different topics and a bunch of different people working on these. And that actually was not that different from us creating a blog network with one site about gadgets and phones, another one about cars, another one about video games, one about parenting. There's really no difference. So we basically built a fleet of magazines, but it was on blog software that I built, and that's why we were a blog company.
So you were a designer. How did you know how to build a how did you start coding, or what was that transition like?
Yeah, exactly. So I was a kid who wanted to be a comic book artist. And when I went to college, my dad was like, I'm not paying for college for you to have a big ring on your finger that says you know how to draw. If you want to show somebody you can draw, just take out a friggin' napkin and draw, right? You got to get a science degree. So I actually got a physics and astronomy degree. So I was very technical. So when the web came about, it was really, content management systems, which is really my history, are really take a design, take a template, take a million record database, merge them together. And that was it. So building tools so that people could crank out tons and tons of content is a healthy mix of design and technology. So it's great at databases. Here's the thing. Actually, wasn't wasn't great at either one. So if I compete with somebody who's an artist, they'll kill me because I'm like an 8 or a 7, right? But in technology, they're a 1, and I'm an 8 or a 7 in that too. So it's pretty well balanced. That sort of like Renaissance type thing of science and art. And so that was really my thing. And the web was a great place for sort of a Renaissance, man, like the science and art balance.
And what was kind of your official transferring over point from print to web? Like, was that when you launched one of these publications with Jason?
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. Let me see. So it wasn't that. It was the web part. So I lucked out. So a friend of mine actually said, "Hey, you dabbled in the web a little bit. You built, and I really hadn't. I had done no web work. This is 95. He goes, "Hey, TV Guide's looking for somebody to design their website. You should go, try out for that." And then after he sent me in, he realized, oh crap, I should do that too. So he actually went in to the job he recommended me for, and I beat him, and I got this job. And so I'd been working with Business Week, doing all of their, desktop support, doing databases for their bestseller lists and things like that, right? A lot of boring, Novell servers, printer doesn't print type junk. And then I went next door to TV Guide at News Corp, where I would have another big project like 15 years later. And I got to design the first ever TV Guide website. So that was really it. I got to do that. Then I went back to Business Week and I said, guys, you need a website. And here's exactly what they told me in September of 95. They said, we're on AOL. When somebody spends $3 an hour on AOL, if they're on our screen looking at B-School transcripts, junk like that, we get $1.50 of that. We are printing money on AOL. You can't make money on the web. It's like just content for free, and it's like ugly and gray, and it's horrible. AOL is interactive. AOL makes us money. Why would we need a website? The weirdest thing, a couple days later, I get a call from the guy who's Business Week's webmaster. And he says, hey, does anybody in the support department know the web? Because I'm the webmaster, but I have no idea what a website is or what to do. And we need to get these bankers' trust tapes online, this big scandal. We can't push it through AOL. We have to put it on the web. So I ended up helping build Business Week's first website. So I've kind of lucked into, from 95 on, only working with brands you've known. And that was really the transition. Those two sites, taking them from, TV Guide magazine, a Business Week magazine, a Business Week online AOL, and taking them both to the web.
And when did you decide to then try to launch your own publications?
Yeah, so then that one magazine I had with Jason that nobody knows about called Cyber Surfer, for Starlog of all companies, we did a website for that. That was a lot of fun. And then later on, so what actually happened was, worked with Jason. We went through the .com crash. So this would be 2001, 2002. It was kind of miserable. And we weren't working together. And he invited me to go to a New York Knicks basketball game. It was the jersey number retirement ceremony for Patrick Ewing. And we're sitting there and we kicked I know we want to work with Jason, it's not easy, by the way, but for some foolish reason, I wanted to do that. So so we kicked around like a dozen ideas. And one of them was like, oh, I'll actually tell you exactly what happened. Two people that used to work for Jason that were on the management team, or one was on the management team with me, they had both gone on to do blogs. So blogging was kind of getting hot 2002, 2003. One of them, who I'm a huge fan of, I'm an advisor to his company now, Skift, Rafat Ali, he was doing paid content, and it was a one-man blog out of London. And then another one was Sheni Jardin, and she was working with these three guys, and they had this site called Boing Boing. And they were off doing these really amazing things. And we watched, and looking at what Rafat was doing, he was, making good money, but he couldn't really expand the business and get that second employee, right? So if you make 50, 60, 70 grand a year, you can kind of do it yourself. But then when you add that other employee, what if for 2 months you don't get any ad revenue? It dries up. You have to fire them. He just couldn't expand his business yet. So we said, wait, what if we took the About.com model? What if we had kind of a franchise, like a platform? And we built our site. And so I went and I came up with two names for this. And one was Weblogs Inc., as in Weblogs Incorporated, professional weblogs. It's safe to put your advertising dollars here, right? And the other was Blogsmith, kind of like blacksmith, building stuff, right? And that was the blog platform. Today, Blogsmith is still running at AOL, the software that I built, and then later on had a team build even better. And Engadget and Autoblog still run on that, and they moved AOL.com, the portal, onto that platform. So pretty crazy 15, 18-year-old software, still runs one of the biggest sites out there.
And so what did you guys start doing? You started launching these sites, and did you recruit bloggers, or what was how did you start populate, what was the actual launching of these different trade blogs?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. So we ended up, oh my God, we did so many horrible things. and I don't think about these very often. But the site was Weblogs Inc., which is a pretty long domain name, weblogsinc.com. So we were going to be like about.com, where they had, cars.about.com and, Microsoft.about.com, like whatever these topics were, it was a subdomain. So we had some really disgusting stuff like domain name wise, like medicalinformatics.weblogsinc.com. That was one of our domain names, like one of our sites. It was terrible. So when we started out, so I'll give you the very beginning was the only other blog network that existed was Nick Denton's blog network, which was Gawker. And I don't know how many sites he had at the time. I think Gawker existed. I think Gizmodo existed. Peter Rojas was doing Gizmodo. And there were a few other sites. So we were going to do a competitor to that. So what we first did was we put up a one-page manifesto. Jason wrote something, talked about how we were going to come and like hire people and do exactly what you said, right? Go change, the face of blogging. And the blogosphere hated us. We were late to the party. We were idiots. This is terrible. This is going to make like price wars for hiring bloggers and stuff like that. You're just going to ruin like this cool place. Kind of like when companies came into the internet. It ruined it for all the people before the companies came in. So they hated us. It was terrible. And we ended up doing it anyway. And now you look back and we were like blogging pioneers. So it's just funny. It's like never too late to jump into something and make a splash. So we did this one-page manifesto. People hated us. Later on, we launched 4, 5, 7 different sites on our way to, I think we had like 80 or 100 when AOL bought us, which is only like 2 years later. And very quickly, here, I'll tell you a really cool thing. Nick Denton wrote a 5-part reason for why we would fail. There are 5 Weblogs Inc. was going to fail. One of his reasons, the only one he retracted out of the 5, was that we were running it on our own software that I built. Because he was using movable type, which was the gold standard. It was free. Why would you ever want to use something like, why don't you just tap into this project that somebody else is doing? You're an idiot to write your own software. And later on, he regretted that they didn't make their own software. And that was the only one he took back. Of the other 4 reasons, one was we had really crappy subdomains, right? Medical teleinformatics or whatever.weblogsinc.com, and not consumer-friendly names, which we learned we needed to do. Autoblog, Engadget, right? Hackaday, all these things. And another one of the things, one of the other 5 reasons was Jason Calacanis is an asshole. And that kind of still sticks. So, okay.
Yeah. Well, like, how did you recruit? So you had 70 different blogs. How were you recruiting people to write for all these different sites?
Yeah. So Jason and I had, worked with a lot of people who wrote, but it was very easy to say, hey, so after the .com crash, everybody loses all their journalism jobs and they all move back in with their parents or whatever, whatever they did. Right. And they're all kind of hungry for work. So people were making their own sites and they weren't getting paid to do it. So we kind of gave them an offer, and really the offer evolved over time. Again, the first stab at this sucked. We said, hey, Simon, come work with us. And we're going to do a thing about content, and you come in and write this, and we'll split the money with you. And then a $6 check comes in, and we give you $3, and you hate us, right? Like that was what about.com did too, right? Like there was a lot of reasons why that parts of it didn't work. So later on, we said, screw it, we will pay you per post. So I think we started out paying $2 or $2.50 a post, which is like way below minimum wage, right? Unless you realize you're writing 1 to 3 paragraphs and putting a photo in it. You can do 6 of these an hour. So really you're making $18 an hour, right? And eventually the bigger blogs started making more money. And so really when you jump forward, we dabbled in a lot of different advertising networks. I've forgotten all the names of these, the ad networks that were out there, Burst and something Click, Tribal Fusion, right? All these ad networks. But the one that really stuck was Google's AdSense. And we ended up, it's kind of a neat thing I don't think about too much, but when we worked with Google before they IPO'd, when they did their IPO, in the documents you had to write, they had a case study. I think there were 2 case studies about AdSense customers, and we were one of them because we were on track to make $1 million a year off of AdSense. And so Google used my company as an example of why people should buy their stock when they IPO, because they might be something big someday.
And what did you notice, like, in terms of like how quickly the audience grew? Like, who were these, like, like what was going through your head as you guys are like pumping out tons of content? Like, what kind of audience did you see kind of sprout up about that? Like, did you see like a real fan base that was like coming around these blogs, and were these bloggers like developing like a real brand, or was it much more transactional where you were just pumping out tons of stuff?
It was a little of both. So we learned a lot of rules that don't apply anymore, right? So one of them was 50% of your. Well, it's funny actually. Some of the rules apply now to podcasting and other forms of content. So one thing we realized was exactly half the traffic went to the homepage and half the traffic came into archived permalink pages through search engine. So looking for some specific camera or some specific car model or some kind of quote, right? And it was 50-50. And it's kind of the same thing with podcasts. Like the newest show is like 50%, and then the archives is like 50% of what's going on. So it's a fascinating thing to watch. So we learned a lot of rules like that. I'll tell you another rule we learned was, and these don't apply the same way today, but we learned if you do 10 posts a day on Engadget, on Autoblog, you get, X number of traffic. If you do 20 posts a day, you will double your traffic. So just do more posts, hire more people, do more stuff. 30, it reaches kind of a maximum. When we would cover CES, they were doing 60, 70, 80 posts a day, and you just couldn't keep up with it. It was just too much. So we had to, take a site and make a spin-off site. So we learned, some things about the cadence of publishing. We learned what people couldn't do. But the rules back then were completely different. People used RSS readers, to read content. They would watch all their blogs in an RSS reader. Google Reader came along, destroyed that market, and then Google Reader was shut down. So it's a completely different ballgame, but we just learned a lot of interesting rules. There weren't, let's say, personality breakouts. There were definitely brand breakouts. And, another thing we learned was it's really, really hard to have 60 different sites and 60 teams on 60 different topics and have one of them or two of them be a runaway winner. So think of a radio station that has Howard Stern and a bunch of other nobodies as their DJs, right? It's really, how do you balance that hit machine? So Engadget, some days would be half of our traffic. So we would have our bloggers, we were on a big mailing list, bloggers@webbloggsinc.com. And there would be, fights. The guy running the Photoshop blog, which got like 11 hits a day, was like, why aren't you guys selling ads on my property? And we're like, well, you don't have an audience. Work harder. I'm not sure what we can do. And we have one person selling ads. So he's going to sell ads for Engadget, for Autoblog, for Hackaday. So it was a lot of, balancing personalities, but it wasn't, I'd say, breakout personality wise, but definitely was for the brands.
And like, was it like herding cats, like dealing with all those writers?
1,000%. It's funny. So I love running a virtual company. I've had, teams of 8 in 7 different time zones, right? Like I like that, the sun never sets on your empire kind of thing where they're all over the planet. It's so much easier today with Slack and with, every video conferencing, all this stuff. Back then it was really, really hard. We had AOL Instant Messenger or Yahoo Messenger. Like these are pretty feeble products, right? And a mailing list. So we ran a company, all these personalities through email, and it's way easier to do that. So it was a lot of, there were hundreds of people working with us when we sold the company. So we only, we worked on it for a bit. Mark Cuban invested a little bit of money. We did his blog around the same time as Engadget. By the time his money hit the bank, the advertising kind of took off with AdSense and all these other networks to where I don't think we ever actually touched the money he put in the bank, which is kind of wild. 15, months later or so, we handed him a check. Like we look like geniuses, and we continued on. But I think we had, like I said, about 100 sites. There were hundreds of people working with us. And so we got really good at managing a large distributed talent base with also varying levels of talent. And the ones that were working the least, here's a funny thing. When we sold the company, we said we were going to give all the bloggers bonuses. And AOL said, you can't do that. And we said, well, yes, we can. We're going to write them checks. And they go, no, legally, you can't. So we had to do this whole thing where we had them sign an agreement, like, Simon, you're going to get a check for this. Just, this is it. This is the terms of our relationship. Anyway, we did all these checks. And when we did, the people who complained the most, when we looked at their counts, had done like 4 blog posts. And the people who complained the least had done hundreds of blog posts. So it was just kind of wild to see who complained the most, who worked the hardest. And yes, it was a giant personality, stew.
And so how did the AOL deal come about? Like what led to that discussion? Because that was known as, I think, the biggest sale at that point of a blog.
Yeah, totally. So, we were the first of the 3 that they did. After that, they did Huffington Post and TechCrunch, and I forget which order they did them in, but probably that order.
I think they, but that was years
later because Ariana actually wrote Jason when she was starting Huffington Post, and we had already sold our company. So, and if you think about it, like Gary Tan started Posterous, his blogging platform, like 2 years after we sold our blogging platform, right? So it's wild to see kind of what came later. So the question again, you said about the AOL deal
is, just how did it come about? What led to that?
So Jason knows everybody. That's how it came about. He knew Mark Cuban from being at his conferences. That's how we got him as an investor. Here's an interesting thing. We had actually talked to Jeff Bezos. We showed him what we were doing. We had a great meeting with him at Amazon. We went and toured a bunch of companies. We went to Yahoo and Google and had all these great meetings during that sort of year and a half, 2 years of running weblogs. And one of them, we went up to Seattle, and they said, well, Jeff's not going to have any time to meet with you. So it'll be like one of his lieutenants. And then maybe Jeff will have 15 minutes. So no, he's not going to make it. So we showed up, and Jeff actually spent 45 minutes with us, grilling us about how he came up with domain names. Where did the name Engadget come from? How about Autoblog, which I think we paid $400 for autoblog.com, back in the day. So really cool meeting. So Jason knew everybody. We got to meet everybody. And at some point, he was talking to a bunch of companies. We were actually talking about doing an investment round. So we're going to do our A round, and it was going to be Jeff Bezos, Mark Andreessen, and Mark Cuban. Those are going to be our investors. And around the same time, a bunch of companies said, well, what if we acquired you? And so we ended up at AOL. And the people who were responsible for that were really Jason knew Ted Leonsis. We met John Miller, who I love, and Jim Bankoff was really excited about what we were doing. And if you look at what he's doing today, it's our playbook, right? A bunch of vertical sites with bloggers with your own platform that you built yourself, like they have Chorus, right? It's our playbook, but with like 2 or 3 extra zeros on the end of it. He's just taken it to a whole new level. So we kind of lucked into, I don't know if luck's the right word, but we kind of fell into this really cool spot where the right people liked what we were doing and wanted to bring us in quickly.
And then they just made the offer.
Yeah, so we got an offer from them. I mean, it's never they make an offer, we get a check, we show up in Virginia. No, we had an offer, it fell through. We had an offer from Fox. We got a new offer from AOL. It was better than the Fox one, and we ended up at AOL. So a little messy road, but it was 6 months of messy road. Can't complain.
But they were just buying the blog network itself. They weren't buying like the technology behind it and stuff like that.
Correct. So that is something which is Fox had actually offered less money. So I don't know, 22-ish or something like that for the entire company, the software, the blogs, everything. And AOL offered more money for just the publications, just the blogs, and really the team that knew how to take a new topic and rock out a site, design it, stand it up, get a team for it, get advertisers, and go. And so AOL really liked that model. They didn't think they needed the software. Weird thing. A year later, they bought the software for another bunch of millions of dollars. And in the middle, the thing that really convinced them was they launched a site called TMZ. And I like to say that TMZ launched on my software, but it technically didn't. It actually launched on the same publishing platform that AOL used for AOL.com. It was a site called Big Bowl, and that site. So imagine this, you're Harvey Levin, you're breaking news about some celebrity thing, right? Everybody else is trying to get this news. You have a few minute window to get this out the door, to really have the scoop on this. And you go to your AOL publishing system, and it has to go through legal review. And 4 hours later, your story's out on the homepage, and everybody in the world has scooped you. So he was actually going out of his mind using their publishing software, hated it, and was saying, why can't we use what the Engadget people, the Autoblog people have? They hit save, the story's immediately on the homepage, and they can handle millions of hits. Like, why can't we use that? And so AOL didn't say, well, we don't own that. They said, sure, no problem, Harvey, we'll give you that. So they worked with us. We helped them kind of relaunch TMZ, take it out of obscurity, 2 or 3 months of obscurity, and then put them on a platform where they could hit publish. And it was immediate. It would actually publish too quickly. So then they would come to me and complain because I think they published a story about Larry King getting divorced. Let's say it's that. And it said like Larry King is divorcing his, 7th wife or whatever. And it was actually his 8th wife. So they went back to correct it, but Google had already indexed it and told the whole world it was his 7th wife, and they couldn't get Google to change because the site was so fast and everything worked so well and it was so SEO optimized that like it was too late. The story was out there. So they, anyway, it was a really funny thing. So we, a year later, after about a year to the day after we sold them the blog company, we sold them the blog software. And like I said, they still use it. And
so when Engadget and all those other blogs went on, did they go onto AOL's platform, or was like AOL just licensing your software?
They licensed ours. There was no way on earth they were going to run these things on their own software. This is like the dark ages of the internet, but AOL used a web server called AOL Server that used TCL, tickle scripts, they called it. And we used Apache, which is kind of like what people did, right? Apache and PHP. And they didn't have people running Linux servers. They had I don't know what they had. But anyway, they had some really crazy stuff. There was no way on earth we were going to move our stuff into their publishing platform unless we wanted to just kill all the speed and everything that was cool and nimble about us. So they left us on our own software. They were very nice about that. They were great. We, there's that PayPal mafia that everybody talks about. I love the AOL mafia. Ted Leonsis, like I said, Jim Bankoff. We worked with Tina Sharkey. She's a machine running, raising like hundreds of millions of dollars for Brandless. So we met some really cool people that went on to do some neat stuff, and they left us alone. They had a few, they had a lot of businesses that they brought in and killed. That was kind of the joke, was AOL was where brands go to die. Netscape doesn't exist anymore, right? They paid $4 billion for that, right? Like there's so many things went there to die. And they did a really good job of like, we're going to really leave you alone and let you do your thing and not mess with you too much. They messed with us a lot, but it could have been way worse.
And so were you guys, like you and Jason, you were still overseeing the blog network at AOL?
Yeah, we did a lot of things. So we took over the Netscape site when we were there, turned it into a Dig clone. So it was like voting stories up and down. So we got to do that. So we did a lot of other projects there, but no, we continued to run the blog network and continued to run our sites. And really, actually, we fought with them. So if you think about it, my favorite story was one of the people in charge of legal there, Lauren Fisher, who now works with Jim Bankoff and Box. She was my only person I got into like a shouting match with there. So there's something we were doing, and anyway, I ended up kind of loving everybody afterwards. But Jason was only there a year. I was there a year and a half, so we did a lot in that amount of time. But ancient history.
And so, like, what was your perception of, like, I mean, obviously AOL. Now we know they were bought by Verizon, later also acquired Yahoo. Now they've had their struggles over the years. What was your perception of what was going on at AOL at the time, while it was like trying to be this digital media company?
Yeah, it was. It's I look at people like Marissa Mayer going into Yahoo to go kind of rescue it from itself, right? And I just don't, or my friend Mike Jones went and ran MySpace and tried to like rescue that, what was the largest site on the planet at one point, and trying to fix that is, I kind of joke, it's like standing in the middle of a baseball field with a glove trying to catch a falling airplane. You're probably not going to be able to do it. So AOL was the same thing. They had so much sort of momentum as a large company that we were isolated from it, which is good. But they would ask us when we go to launch software things, they would say, well, where's your PRD? And I would say, well, what is that? And they go, it's I don't know. I actually still don't know what it stands for, but I think it's like project resource document. It's a 900-page document talking about the thing that you're going to build. I was like, well, in the time you could write a PRD, we just build the software and we ship it. And they're like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, well, we already did. Like while we were talking, we just shipped new software. They hated us. So it didn't, they had a lot of big company stuff. At one point, I think I was owed, we would get our team together for code jams. We'd fly to a city, we'd rent hotels, we'd do all this stuff. I think at one point I had like $75,000 in unpaid expenses from this stuff because we were still running our company like a startup and we didn't know how to use their expense system, their expense reporting and reimbursement system. And it was like, it was a nightmare. So it was a big culture clash, big speed clash. But the people that we loved, so think of it this way. There are teams, like I used to be a Yankees fan. I love the Yankees, moved away from New York, so I don't really care that much anymore. And the reason I don't care is those players aren't there anymore. So the people that I loved aren't there anymore. So I don't think of AOL at Verizon as the same AOL that acquired us and that we work. I think of AOL as John Miller, Ted Leonsis, Tina Sharkey, Jim Bankoff, a whole bunch of people that were cool that are absolutely long gone.
And so you left and you continued to build content management systems, right?
Sadly, yeah, it's true. So I left and I thought, oh my God, I have the best idea. And it's not an idea that, was unique to me. Peter Rojas and Ryan Block from Engadget went off and built a site called GDGT, like Gadget without the vowels. And it was a product database. And I had the exact same idea. I'm going to make a product database platform. So kind of think WordPress, but for commerce and shopping and structured data and things like that. So I went off, built a new platform. That was fun. We were going to build our own sites. I thought we were building Weblogs Inc. too. I thought it would be, a gadget blog, but with a product database, and a car site, but with a product database. So we did that. Our lead investors were John Miller and Ross Levinson, who were the two people who had offered to buy my company way back when. So we ended up working with both of them. That was cool. But we did that. It was another CMS platform. And then we built the daily. We realized selling to publishers was kind of not fun. There wasn't as much money as we hoped there'd be in that space. And then, but weirdly enough, when AOL and Time Warner split up, TMZ needed a new platform. So they became our first customer at that post AOL company of mine. And they still run on that software today. So it's kind of cool.
What was your motivation for building CMSs? Like when we have things now like WordPress, Drupal, movable type, it seems like we're drowning into these like large scale CMSs. What is the argument for continuing to build these like custom CMSs these days?
Yeah, so it's less and less of a good argument these days. I would definitely say that. I love Matt Mullenweg. I'm a fan of WordPress. I love. There's a lot of good products out there. Like I said, Trey with the Vox product, Chorus. I mean, Medium is just a beautiful CMS, right? From Ev. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. There's less and less of a reason to do it yourself. It really comes down to how tightly coupled do you need your publishing process and your platform to be with your team. So if you're, doing some heavy intensive audio thing, there's nothing out there for you. You have to build your own. If you're just doing a blog, oh my God, go use any one of the blog platforms. So it doesn't matter so much anymore. It did a long time ago. They've definitely come a long way. And what you just mentioned is actually the reason I don't do it anymore. It's not that much fun. When we were doing CrowdFusion, the post AOL company, we built the Daily. We built, we moved TMZ onto our platform. We worked with Best Buy on our product database site. We also had MySpace Topics, which was hundreds of thousands of topic pages and aggregation and all this really cool cutting edge stuff. And the problem was, after you get those first 4 whatever customers, when you go down the ComScore list, like after TMZ, the next 3 things in entertainment and gossip don't have their budget. Like they can't afford you. So whatever you charge, like the number 1, number 2, and number 3 are kind of maybe struggling and might go out of business. So it just wasn't a lot of money, and publishing platforms didn't make any sense. So I got out of it.
And you were also still working with Jason Calacanis, right? Like he has this podcast, This Week in Startups.
Yeah.
Obviously, he has this kind of reputation. He has this reputation as being kind of this manic guy who isn't always easy to work with. I remember skirmishes that happened between him and Michael Arrington back in the day. What was going on with you and him all this time?
Yeah. So when you were saying that, I was thinking I didn't. But yeah. So after he left AOL, he started Mahalo and raised a bunch of money for that, and invited me to come. Not be 50-50 partners in that like we were before, but be like a CTO with a couple percent. And I said no, and not because of the offer so much as, like you said, he's intense and he's a lot. So I took like an 8-year break from Jason. I didn't do the Mahalo stuff. I visited him. I think like around 8 years after this stuff, he was in LA, I was in LA, and he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. Do you want to come be my first guest?" And that was This Week in Startups. And I was his first guest, and it was, it feels like a million years ago now. He's, I think, on 850 episodes now, 900 episodes. So it's become a big thing. So I slowly, went back into doing things with him. He's the biggest investor in the thing that I'm doing right now. I will guest host his incubator when he's out of town. I guest host conferences, like co-host conferences with him. So, we do a lot more together. I helped him write his angel book. That was a lot of, it's like 2 days of working with Jason and then I need a break again. So I totally love him, but I love him like a brother. So when I complain about him, it's like complaining about your brother. You're allowed to love him. You're allowed to hate him. But if anybody else hates him, you kind of, step in and help.
And you mentioned this briefly, but you ended up working on the Daily, which people who don't know, that was kind of like the first high profile publication that was going to be on the newly launched iPad back like circa 2010 or so. It was, Rupert Murdoch, News Corp going all in on it. It spent millions of dollars on it, and it kind of it crashed and burned, and kind of represented like what the entire media industry thought the iPad was going to save it, and it didn't. How did you end up working on that project?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was one of the coolest things I've ever worked on, and weirdly doesn't exist, and I can't show you it, right? Like I can link you to the one Super Bowl commercial they had, first app to have a Super Bowl commercial. That's kind of cool. But otherwise, it's just gone, vanished. And it was a really weird thing. So I ended up working on it because the ex-CTO of, it was actually because John Miller was working with Rupert Murdoch. And he said, "Hey, I need you to meet these 2 people that are working on this new thing." And I think for a while they were kicking around, they were definitely kicking around names for a few months. But they were calling it Daily Planet. They were calling it a few different things. And then it eventually became The Daily. And I met them for breakfast. They told me what they wanted to do. They wanted, the iPad was a few months old at this point. So I think it launched in like April of 2010. And this would have been June. We're having breakfast. And somewhere that summer, it was like, they really, really needed to build this thing. So we had like 4 months to build a publishing system for an iPad newspaper that could crank and bring in an app team. So I brought in some friends that had an app team. And, the things I remember about the experience are, you only had 4 months to build it. We did it out of the like executive boardroom spaces on the second floor of the News Corp building. Like nobody was allowed to go to. So like the food was off the charts. Like this is a bunch of like, unshowered developers working around the clock on something. But then when they stop to eat, it's like filet mignon. It was completely weird. Oh, and there are paintings on the wall. They were like, whatever you do, just don't touch that. That's like, tens of millions of dollars paintings and stuff. So anyway, so it's a really cool experience. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I didn't, I never met Steve Jobs, but my team actually did go out there and work there because they had never done. So this was, if you think about this was actually in my head. I don't think it was on paper, but it was kind of like a joint venture between Steve Jobs and Rupert Murdoch. So Rupert Murdoch wakes up one day, after the iPad's been out for a few weeks, and he's like, I have this vision, this iPad newspaper, right? Swipeable, like a Harry Potter interactive magical experience with your, touch screen, right? And I want to build that. And so Steve Jobs actually had a hand in it. He did design reviews for the app. So Apple thought that the News Corp designers, which is actually the app team that I brought in, weren't going to do a very good job. So they were mocking up their own version of the app, and they were going to design it. And then my friend's app team was also designing it. So Steve Jobs would do a design review, and he actually ended up saying, wow, I like that other guy's stuff better than ours. Later on, they, of course, built Apple News. They wanted to do that. They wanted to have a news app that came pre-installed on the iPad. So they ended up doing it later. But we had like a time window to get this thing launched of like 4 months, which was insane. And it was moved a bit because Steve got sick again. And then I don't think he wasn't at the launch. But we got to interact a lot with Apple through this, which is kind of cool. They had never done recurring iTunes billing. So, from iTunes at that point in 2010, you could buy a song for $1 and they would take their 30% cut. And you could buy an item. That was it. They'd never done like I could subscribe to something per week or per year. And so they were building that. And so we actually worked with them to help them get that across the finish line in time to launch the daily. And it was the first thing that had recurring subscriptions from iTunes in it.
And why do you think ultimately the daily and a lot of these other shiny magazine apps on the iPad failed? Like I just remember every single every Condé Nast magazine was sending out press releases about how they had their new iPad app out. There was all this like these trend pieces about how the iPad was going to kind of put the toothpaste back in the tube. People were going to start paying for content again. You'd have these like really glossy, beautiful ads that were like magazine ads. What was your kind of perception of like why all that went to shit, basically?
Yeah, so it really was, right? Put the genie back in the bottle. That was the idea, right? Paid content is back, baby. We got the iPad, and it didn't work. So, I could go through like a dozen different things, but the two big reasons why the daily failed was not what a lot of people thought, like it was bloated or, like it definitely wasn't the software. That was pretty awesome. But it was specifically that they didn't own a direct relationship with their subscribers. So as a business, it was a really tricky business. And I'll unpack that in a second. And then the other part was just, they split News Corp into two. And the daily went with like, I forget which side it went to, but whatever side it went to, they just said, it's a cost center. I don't think Rupert Murdoch was excited about it anymore, or he wasn't involved in the side it was going to. And they just kind of, shuttered it. But it wasn't a failure. So here's the weird thing. So they had, I don't know how many downloads they got, but they had 200, I think they had 200,000 downloads. So 200,000 installs of the app, right? Of that, 100,000 people were subscribers. They had 100,000 paying subscribers. That was phenomenal. That's an 18-month product, has 100,000 paying subscribers. So, and even then they even, on top of that, they collected 150,000 email addresses from those people. So here's the exact thing that I think kind of broke it. They didn't own the subscribers themselves. So if you were subscribed to this and you unsubscribed, Apple owned you and that relationship. The Daily and News Corp didn't. So they had your email address, but they didn't know which email address matched the person who just unsubscribed. They didn't have any of the billing, credit card, any of that. So they couldn't write you and say, hey, Simon, why did you stop? How can we win you back? Can you tell us how to make the product better? They just couldn't do that. They had no direct relationship with the customer. So it was a thing that Jason complained about a lot when he was doing Mahalo and with YouTube, where you could have 1 million subscribers on YouTube, but you can't talk to them. except in the YouTube comments, which is horrible, right? It's like going in a dark alley. It's pretty terrible. So you can't do that. So there was just, YouTube owns your subscribers. iTunes owns the daily subscribers, right? Facebook owns your followers. So it was really a bastard gatekeeper that killed the daily.
What I remember thinking at the time is like, why was he launching a new newspaper? Like, he already had the Wall Street Journal. Why didn't he just and he already had that brand with all that kind of, all that brand equity that had been built over decades, and he already had like a subscriber base there. Why didn't he just try to launch that onto the iPad rather than trying to launch an entire newspaper from scratch?
Yeah, so I think they thought, hey, if we do this, then and we do it right, do it new, then we can pull the Wall Street Journal and these other things in. The New York Post would get their own, and they did. A lot of that team went to go build the New York Post iPad app and stuff like that. It was a different thing. I think they felt like they were creating a new kind of site. And I just think they also underestimated how being behind a hard paywall like that, because not even a paywall, it's not even like, can you get around it on the web and still see the content? It's not on the web. Like you can't find it. I can't share it with you. It's in an app.
Well, I think there were permalinks, but you had to know the exact URL.
It was crazy. There was actually, it's funny. So there was a guy who would go and take those and build an index of each day's daily issue out on the web. And they were like, should we sue the guy? Should we shut this thing down? It was kind of funny. And but there was just other weird stuff. Like, I don't think they thought through, like, so here's the deal. Today, let's say you're doing like Thursday's crossword puzzle, because they had a crossword puzzle app in the daily. So you're working on that and you're like 80% of the way through, and you want to come back and finish it up. And now it's like, let's say, you're on the West Coast, it's like 9:05 p.m., but now it's 12:05 on the East Coast where the daily's published. That crossword puzzle vanishes. There was no archive. Like, we had all the issues in our system, but literally you're like, oh crap, man, I was like 10 words away from completing the crossword puzzle, and then now there's a new puzzle. There was just weird stuff like that because it was such an ephemeral, strange, paywalled, thing. And so they broke stories. I think they broke the news about the pink slime in McDonald's hamburgers, right? Like that kind of thing. They had videos of it. They did all this great stuff. Well, what happens when the TV news wants to talk about it? They show the video that the Huffington Post stole out of the Daily, right? And then the Huffington Post gets credit or whatever, right? Like that kind of stuff. So I don't think they understood how that genie back in the bottle, just how hard it was to get people into that bottle to go see that thing, and just how hard that paywall was going to be.
And it seems like so we're in this age of this successful paywall now with the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. It seems like what they learned from it is they need to own those relationships, and now they seem to be like building those customer relationships on the open web. And then they have apps that you can subscribe to, like the Wall Street Journal has a very robust app, but a lot of those relationships are built on the open web, and then you can just log in through the app, because they know that if they sign up through Apple, not only does Apple get its cut, but it owns like a lot of that relationship.
Yeah, it owns the entire relationship. Great for Apple, great for for them, but not great for you. Yep.
And what are your thoughts on the current crop of news aggregation apps like Apple News, Flipboard? Do you think that's kind of the route to go, that like it needs to be kind of more of an aggregation of lots of different sources? I know Apple just bought Texture, which is a subscription kind of Spotify-like magazine app. Like, do you think that's a better iteration of what this should look like on an app experience?
So the answer is yes and no. So yes, it is undeniably a better iteration. The software today, the experience today, all these things today are so much better. Nobody's cracked it though. I mean, you're different than most people, right? You'll use a Flipboard. You'll still use some kind of a feed reader type thing. You listen to podcasts, right? You have all these consumption habits that are sort of like by journalists for journalists type thing, right? Like you're deep into that. But ask anybody else on the planet, have you heard of Flipboard? Have you heard of Apple News? People aren't. I don't think people are aware. Even people who use Apple News, they're not aware that they're using Apple News. They just know that they got, just like Google's AMP, right? I just got a link. How do I remove that extra crap out of the link so I can share this with my friend, right? They just don't think about it. So I click on Apple News stuff all the time. I click on Medium stuff all the time. I don't think people think too much about where that is, and I don't think they love those products or those brands like those brands would like them to.
I don't know. Maybe Apple News though, because I wrote some articles about Apple News, and it is seeing like really wide adoption now that, especially now that Facebook has shit the bed, and like people are not trusting it. Like publishers are reporting traffic that's like going through the roof, especially now that Apple News is on the iPhone homepage. I think people are actively clicking into that app,
I think that,
and
yeah. No, it could
yeah,
be. I don't know if they click on the app because they want to so much as like I get alerts. So I have the Apple News app on my phone. I get alerts when something happens. If Apple News is fast enough, they'll beat the other things that are trying to get me to click on them to read about the thing that just happened, today. And so I'll get into them, but I'm not doing it because I care. And I mean, and you also, your coverage is all, the traffic is off the charts for this Apple News stuff. Great for publishers. They make no money off of it, right? So
currently, we'll see if it. I
right,
mean, that's the question: is whether if the revenue will catch up to it.
right. And so that's been a theme that I've looked at for a long time, which is these platforms, these content platforms like that, especially the aggregation ones, they need to get their superstars paid. So, the thing I'm working on now is a video app. So I look at things like Vine. And I was on stage at VidCon a few years ago talking, is right before the Vine was shut down. And I said some stuff that people were like horrified by. And I said, like, Vine's basically dead. Pinterest is dead. I was wrong about Pinterest. I was right about Vine. And the problem was these are these big platforms that get superstars on them. It's that Howard Stern thing again, right? How do you get your superstars paid? And it's tough. And so if you look at the number of places writing checks to people who are making content, it's not that big. So there's, it's Google with AdSense and Google with YouTube, right? Those are places you can go make content and get paid. Vine, you can't. Therefore, boom, the superstars leave, you get shut down. A lot of media companies right now, you talk about Facebook really dropping the ball on every front, privacy and all the the PR disasters and all the things that are going on there. But also, I see they launch IGTV, and a lot of publishers are like, and they don't even talk about it as Instagram and Facebook. They talk about it as Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not giving Mark Zuckerberg my content. He keeps coming and asking for my content, but he's cheated me before and he's going to cheat me again. They don't trust him, and he doesn't write them a check. So you can put all your, whatever your TV show is, pick a show, Dancing with the Stars. You can stick that on IGTV. You can stick that on YouTube. YouTube writes you a check. Mark Zuckerberg does not write you a check. So,
and I've never understood that, because like YouTube like pioneered that years ago,
right.
was like writing the check, and then when Facebook started getting really serious about video, you're like, okay, Facebook's going to start doing something like YouTube, and Facebook does write checks. Like Facebook Watch does like pay out and does, but it's on a very case by case basis. Where YouTube really scaled it in a way where as long as you met these kind of minimal thresholds of having 4,000 watch hours and 1,000 subscribers, then you could opt into its system and stuff like that. And then start building not just having like mainstream media companies. It's kind of built out its own YouTube stars, and Facebook keeps on having all this frustration. It's like, why don't we have our own homegrown stars? It's like, well, you have to incentivize them to like start creating content on your page in the first place. Like, yeah, you can lure over the Voxes and the BuzzFeeds of the world by writing them big checks, but like if you want to grow those stars off to your platform organically, then you need to like have people being able to make money from the very beginning.
It's totally true. And so it's not fair to say YouTube and Facebook, YouTube and Google nail this and get it right, because they do the same tricky thing that Facebook does too, which is, hey, we're launching this new product and we're going to pay BuzzFeed and Vox and all these talented people a bunch of money to be part of season 1 of our thing. And YouTube's done that too, right? They subsidized a lot of people and this whole pivot to video type thing, right, years ago, before Facebook did it, and it fell through. But but they've done a consistent job of, like you said, scaling it out so that you and I think, what, if I put my show there, right? You can put a podcast anywhere. You put it on Apple, you don't make any money. You have to go get sponsors. But if you do a show on YouTube, you're getting a check. So it's a tricky thing.
It's interesting. So I don't know how much you're following Medium, but like they have like a huge pool of venture capital money, and they're doing this membership thing now. And basically they're just like putting this big pool of money and saying, okay, put your stuff behind our paywall, and we'll pay using the Spotify system. And that's how they're luring content creators. So you can start getting paid from day one, rather than them. And they are like courting like more mainstream publishers like the New York Times and Bloomberg and all those, and putting that behind their membership wall. But they're also using this big pool of venture capital money. Like they've raised like $130 million,
Yep.
and they're using that as the bait to get the basically build those homegrown stars on there so that they can then start attracting more and more subscribers and have a bigger pool of money. So I'm definitely interested in watching what's going on there over the next few years.
Yeah. So take a musician who you love and you think they're the best thing in the world, and they do some album and you're like, oh man, what are they doing this for? Like a country album? Like they were so good at this other thing, right? That's how I feel about Ev Williams. Big fan of Blogger. What a genius, right? That team, that whole thing. Big fan of Twitter, right? Use it every day. The Medium thing, like it's one of those things where I love the guy and I don't get why is he, like you said, raised 135 million. The company's worth 500 million. So I just don't think they've gone about it, that sort of thrashing of like, wait, now we're doing this. Wait, put all your stuff here. Wait, we're kicking you out. Now we're doing this. I just don't think it's very clear that the changes they're making are going to sort of save that business or make it something good. I'll tell you what I don't like is I love Hunter Walk, the VC. His posts are paid. So when I click on one of his links and I read his story, like, oh crap, one of my 3 free articles is gone now. Now I'm not going to be able to read some other thing. And why should he get a check for $1,500 at the end of the month for writing the same stuff he used to write? Like he's not Vox. He's not, he's a VC. So I think it's just very weird how they've gone about it. And I hope they figure it out. I don't know that they can. I think it's a very tricky thing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have I publish on Medium regularly, and I have my frustrations with the platform. But yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, and it's an interesting experiment to can we make this like a better part of the web? Can we publish high quality content, and can we do it completely 100% without ads with this kind of leaky paywall where some of the content's free, some of it's behind the paywall? Like all my stuff that I put on Medium is 100% free. I don't do the membership stuff. But at the same time, I've also had, now that they're prioritizing the membership stuff, I'm having a harder time getting distribution of my own content. So that's definitely frustrating, but it's definitely something. I kind of poo-pooed it when he first did it and ran the math. But if he can hit that kind of 10 million subscriber number where he's making, 10 million subscribers paying $5 a month, then I think I can start taking it more seriously. So we'll see what happens. And he's definitely bringing in big guns, with, luring top tier editors and paying writers like what they would get paid at magazines, magazine prices. So I don't know, it'll be interesting to watch. So I wanted to talk briefly, so you've moved on from CMSs, you're working on this project or this product called Clipisode. You and I chatted before this episode, and you talked about how you didn't want to just build another app that someone had to download on their phone, because what happens is you get a ton of downloads. This is kind of what happened with Casey Neistat when he launched this video app called Beam. You get a ton of downloads, people play around with it, and then they abandon it. But you had this kind of like really interesting innovation with your video app. So what is the video app, and like what was kind of your thoughts behind it?
Yeah, so in a quick little nutshell, it's a way to make video shows with other people. And like you said, everybody, a long time ago, if I was going to make a video show with you, if I wanted to be on your video show, I had to go download some stupid app. And for a one-time video reply, that's a huge obstacle, right? A huge thing to ask of me. Right?
You wouldn't just have to download the app; like all the people who wanted to watch it had to download the app.
So you're Shakira, and you say, "Hey, I want you to, whatever, pick my next single or pick my next whatever, or tell me your favorite experience at one of my concerts." Right? You want to have these moments, these Periscope-like moments, and you want to have like group video show with these people. Yeah, everybody in the world who wants to reply to that has to go download an app. So we actually just did, I'll quickly walk you through it. We did this campaign, our first brand campaign. So Nationwide had Brad Paisley and Peyton Manning. They do these commercials where they, they're working on the Nationwide jingle, right? The jingle sessions, and they're great. Peyton Manning is driving Brad Paisley out of his mind because he's not a musician. He's a football player, and he's got terrible suggestions, and they just drive each other nuts. It's really cute. So they did a thing where Brad Paisley put out a tweet and a Facebook post and an Instagram story with one of our invitation links in it and said, "Send me your jingle ideas," right? If he'd said, "Now go download the Clipisode app," they would have gotten like 4 replies. One would be from my mom. Like that would suck. That would be a terrible experience. And instead, because people could just click on that tweet, swipe up on that Instagram story and reply through these links, these like mobile web app type experiences, they got hundreds of replies and more video than a Lord of the Rings movie.
So the way the app works then is it works with the open web, so you don't have to download the app to record whatever you want. So the only person who has to have that app downloaded is the person who's kind of moderating the discussion or whatever, right?
Correct.
Uh-huh.
That's it. Just the host.
Uh-huh.
So we built an app where 99% of the people who experience the app don't use the app,
Mhm.
and that's got to be much better than everybody has to download the app.
And so how do you envision, like, once you have kind of wider adoption, what does this product look like from how it's used on a regular basis?
Yeah. So, hoping it's, I look at Periscope and Vine, and I look at these ways that people make content, and I look at these ways that you have super fan and superstar experiences. So I'm really interested in the parts of Periscope that I love, and then trying to make something that does the rest of it differently. Meaning, I could have a great experience with, I don't know, Rihanna on Periscope, where she's live, she's streaming video, and I'm asking her questions. But what if I was on camera sometimes? What if it wasn't live? What if my name was on the screen, right? So we really did take that experience, deconstruct it, keep the parts we liked, change the parts we didn't like. So I really want this to be the way that you have amazing experiences with the people that you love. And, that could be making video shows with your friends. That could be doing a podcast type interview back and forth. But it's really about collaborative two-way video. There's not a lot of collaborative media out there. And I think one of the reasons is nobody wants to, download a whole bunch of apps to go collaborate. And so we're trying to see if we can make a way for you to have, I have Twitter interactions with superstars. It's amazing. It's very easy to do. Can you make them video interactions? That's our goal.
And what's the hope to, like, eventually be able to, like, make money or get acquired, or what's kind of the long-term business goal?
Yeah, totally. So that's very easy. So a lot of people, they point to this app called Bumpers that died, or they point to Anchor, right? The sort of like collaborative podcasting app. And we have, I think, a much easier time with getting brands involved in this little game that we're creating. You want to get brands playing the game too, right? Than you do on an audio app. In an audio app, if you want a brand to jump in to this group conversation, they have to interrupt, because that's what you do with audio. So the beautiful thing is we have an animation engine that runs on top of all the video. So if you're doing a show, you could have, Toyota, Honda, whatever, Starbucks, Chipotle at the bottom of the screen. So you can actually run things on top of video while people are doing things. So we think that there are ways to not do interruptive pre-roll, mid-roll, or, like audio does type things, where you can just have sort of the brand part, have a challenge. Like, I could do a pumpkin spice challenge for Starbucks, like ask my friends or my fans, what's the craziest thing that you could think of to make pumpkin flavored, right? And do a show about it. And so we think there are contests and challenges and things like that. And just a natural way for brands to work into this. And so far, brands think it's interesting. They're worried about UGC. Like, I'll tell you I'll tell you the two biggest barriers to a brand's adopting us so far. One, they just don't believe it works like we say it does, which is really mind blowing. And then the other is they're afraid of fans, like they're afraid of UGC, right? Because
User-generated content.
user-generated content, great. Yeah, so if you do a hashtag out on the Twitter, it just goes to hell, right? 4 kinds of hate erupt, all sides. Like, it's just savage, right? The internet can be really, really mean. So we kind of protect them from that. You're getting the replies, but only you see them. You curate them. You only put out the good ones. Take out the psychos, right? So that solves that. But the funniest thing is, like, we will do a demo with a brand. We'll do a demo with somebody who's like used my software in the past and loves me. And I explain this is how it works. And then they go, great. So when we launch this, when we put this out there, how do we get people to download the app to reply? And I go, you don't. Like, you just click on the tweet. You swipe up on the Instagram story. Like, you just reply. You don't leave those apps. And they go, no, I get that. You showed it to me. We demoed it. I saw that. But at some point, somebody's going to download or install something, right? So you really have to, like, you're doing like a magic trick, and they don't believe when you say, now I'd like to sell you the ability to do the magic trick, that the magic trick actually works, but they just saw it. So it's a funny thing. So our business is getting brands to do branded things, getting them to realize that there's no easier way to source content from around the planet, from your fans inside the apps they already use, from influencers on their phone by texting them or emailing them a link. And so a little bit of education, right? It's a brand new thing, but it's funny how much of a magic trick like experience this is.
And are you seeing any kind of interaction or use of it outside of brands? Like, is there organic pickup of it?
Yeah. A soap opera star DM me. So it works when you have a big audience, right? It's like the 1,000 true fans thing doesn't work if you have 3 fans, right? So getting those super fans to do things with you works when you have a lot of fans. So obviously Brad Paisley, 14 million Facebook fans, 7 million Twitter fans, whatever these numbers are, they're off the charts. But there's a soap opera star that DM'd me. He just did a thing he does like nutrition products and stuff. He has a private Facebook group, only a couple hundred people. Shared a link in there, got a bunch of replies. So it definitely works. There are people who use it. Think of it like a YouTube channel, right? Then brands can do it, regular people can do it, superstars can do it. So it's pretty open ended. It's one reason we got out of the thing I was doing before this was in the recurring crowdfunding space, which wasn't something that a Shakira, Rihanna, Howard Stern, Oprah was ever going to use, right? It was only sort of more obscure people. So I think it's a product that kind of scales up and down from individuals doing shows with their friends to, big giant superstars doing shows with millions of fans.
And it's a call and response product, right? Like, so it's like a YouTube star and they say, hey, send me in your shoot a video of your idea of what I should do for my next episode. And they include a link. So then all their fans have to do is click on that link. It opens up on their phone, it turns on their camera, right? And then they can just hit record. And then as soon as they stop recording, that video then uploads to the cloud. And now that YouTube star can sort through all the different options of people who have uploaded video for them.
Correct. So that's one of our strengths is it's not live, right? So on Periscope, it's live. You ask a question, I ask a question. They're answering my stupid question and they miss your great one, right? Because it kind of flies by. So we specifically set out to build a non-live product. A friend of mine actually has kind of a live version of this and just got acquired by Facebook. And so we're specifically not being live because, so think about it like an interview show. You can mention something to me and the next time I kind of jump in to talk to you, I may have actually watched some YouTube videos or read a book and I'm now more informed. And so it compresses time. So yes, call and response, ask your fans for something, a challenge, get back responses. They don't have to record it live. They can upload it if they've, if they've pre-recorded it, kind of like Vine, right? Where you could upload things too at one point. So yeah, it's a lot like that. It's anti-live. That's one of our sort of 3, there's no app to download. It's not live. Those are 2 of our strengths. Everybody's live.
Okay. Well, Brian, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
On Twitter, Brian Alvey, the web, brianalvey.com, clip it in the app stores.
Awesome. Well, it was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.
Cool fun. Thanks, Simon.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Content on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. See you next week.